The doorbell rang like a verdict at exactly 7 and when I opened it, my sister stood there with two oversized suitcases, a duffel bag, and the look of someone who had already decided the answer. Behind her, the hallway smelled of fresh paint and rain. Inside, my apartment still carried the quiet of early morning, the coffee grinder unburdened, my laptop asleep, the city not yet knocking. "Surprise?" Martha said, and pushed past me as if the living room had always belonged to her. By the time my phone buzzed with my mother's call, I already knew the day had changed something permanent. Before the knock, my life fit together with the clean logic of a spreadsheet. I am Emma, 28, a social media marketer with Digital Pulse, the kind of firm where glass walls make ambition feel natural. My desk faced the city. Every morning, the light came in like a promise. And I believed it. I saved 20% of every paycheck and had begun skimming real estate listings I wasn't ready to act on, just to learn neighborhoods and prices and how a dream starts to resemble a plan. My apartment, rented from my parents at a below-market rate since they bought the building 5 years ago, was my true accomplishment. I had furnished it piece by piece the sectional I paid off in 6 months, the estate sale coffee table I refinished until it gleamed, the bookshelves lined with psychology texts, marketing case studies, and a row of vinyl from college. I had a memory foam mattress worth every penny, linen sheets that felt like a small declaration of adulthood, a window nook where rainy Sundays belonged to coffee and a paperback. Every object had a receipt and a story. Every story was mine. My family, though, had a way of turning ownership into a debate. Martha, younger by 3 years and perpetually the exception to every rule, had always been treated by our parents as a fragile heirloom. When I needed a car, I signed a loan. When she needed one, our parents handed over keys. When I scrambled after an early career layoff, I got a loan with interest. When she quit a job because it felt wrong, she went home rent-free. I made peace with the pattern by building a life that didn't ask them for anything but punctual maintenance and a quiet hallway. 2 weeks before the knock, Martha texted me out of the blue to ask how I was. The question floated like a balloon tied to a stone. Then my mother called, her voice wrapped in the warm gauze she reserves for causes already decided. Martha was going through a hard time: breakup, job stress, heartbreak that needed space. Family, she said, sticks together. I agreed in theory because theories are weightless. Then Martha arrived in practice. She wheeled her luggage across the rug, examined my shelves, commented that the place looked grown up, and sank into my sofa as if it remembered her. When I said the apartment was 1 bedroom and I worked from home 2 days a week and quiet mattered, she nodded sympathetically and, a moment later, suggested she take the bedroom because mornings didn't suit her and the living room had better light. My mother's call came while my pulse was still stuttering. "Make your sister feel welcome. This is temporary. She needs you now. Don't be selfish." The word landed like an old bruise. I compromised she could stay on the pullout. She smiled and unpacked her cosmetics across my coffee table as if survival required 40-minute showers and 3 kinds of highlighter. In 1 week, my life reconfigured around someone else's gravity. On Wednesday, I angled my laptop to hide the blanket thrown across the sofa and a garment jungle looping from chair to doorknob. When my boss asked about the unusual backdrop on a client call, I muttered something about redecorating and promised a return to form. In the evenings, I wrote a polite list of house rules, then watched Martha set it face down beneath her mug. Groceries vanished as if the fridge had sprung a trapdoor. The specialty coffee beans I rationed monthly thinned to the bottom of the bag. She spoke on speakerphone late and slept late and borrowed things without asking, returning them stretched, smudged, or broken. When I protested, she said healing needed time. When I asked for quiet, she called me uptight. When I asked about job applications, she said our parents told her she could stay as long as she needed, and that, since they owned the building, it was basically living with family. I called my father on the balcony, the city wind pressing against my ear. He reminded me about the discount I received, how grateful most people would be, how I had always been the responsible one, how Martha needed stability, how I should be a good sister. Behind the words, the old script murmured, "You, Emma, will bend because you always have." I bent that night and several nights after, ignoring the heat building in my chest, the tiny sparks of resentment like static before a storm. The storm came dressed as a casserole and a manila folder at exactly 7 p. 4 weeks later. My parents sat at my flea market dining table, the one I sanded, until it learned to shine while Martha hovered with a composed, almost anticipatory silence. My father slid the folder to me and said we needed to update my rental agreement. Double rent, starting next month, to reflect 2 occupants and added wear and tear. My fork paused above the plate. I asked why I was paying double when Martha paid nothing. My mother smiled the kind of smile that meant finality and said family supports family. And my father explained that since Martha needed time to recover, I would cover her share temporarily. Martha examined her nails with an interest that looked like victory. I said the increase would eat 70% of my take-home pay and wrench my plans off their rails. My father suggested a better job, extra freelancing, hustle. Something sharp in me years of swallowed words finally cut free. I said I could also move out. The table fell silent. Then all 3 laughed, the sound keen and knowing, as if they had mapped my limits more accurately than I had. "You won't," they said with their eyes. "You never do." I held their laughter in my throat like smoke and pretended not to choke on it. They believed I was cornered, tethered by comfort, unwilling to give up space or savings or the illusion of convenience. My father pressed a pen into my hand and told me to sign. I hovered above the line, then set the pen down. "I'll let you know by the end of the week," I said. The dinner dragged on in false cheer, Martha tossing out plans she had for when she got back on her feet, my parents nodding as if the future was already written. I washed the casserole dish afterward, hands trembling, mind whirling. In the living room, Martha flipped on the television, stretching out on the sofa with my throw blanket tucked under her chin. "You won't really leave," she said. "This place is too perfect, and you hate change." I didn't answer, but something inside me had already shifted into place. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in a year. When Martha left to network at a coffee shop, I pulled my lease from the filing cabinet. My pulse climbed as I scanned the fine print, no fixed term beyond the first year, month to month. Only 30 days notice required. More important, no mention of furnishings. Everything in the apartment, from the espresso machine to the sofa to the shower curtain, was mine. I texted Sophie, whose brother practiced real estate law, and she confirmed it. Unless the lease said otherwise, what I bought belonged to me. With receipts stored neatly in the cloud, I felt a sharp clarity rise in my chest. I called 3 agents. 2 muttered doubts about my timeline, but the third Olivia sounded steady, practical, confident. If I could accept a smaller space or a longer commute, she said, she'd find something. That evening, my inbox filled with 5 listings. None were as polished as my current home, but all were mine for the taking. The following day, I toured them, ticking boxes on my mental checklist. The first 3 were disasters peeling paint, bad neighborhoods, windowless kitchens. The 4th was perfect, but far too expensive. The 5th was small, barely 500 square feet, but it had been newly renovated, with fresh floors, bright paint, and a landlord willing to bend on the deposit if I could move in within 10 days. It was 15 minutes farther from work, but on a direct bus route. Standing in that clean, empty room, I realized I was breathing easier. I signed the lease that afternoon, my hand steady, my heart racing. Back at my apartment, I began to sort what to pack, what to donate, what to sell. The moving company quotes made me wince, so I built a volunteer army instead. Sophie rallied friends with trucks and strong backs. Her boyfriend brought tools to dismantle furniture, and even offered his garage for storage if needed. Timing was the final piece. Scanning my parents' social media, I confirmed what I suspected: they were headed to Aunt Margaret's for a family reunion that weekend. Martha, ever hungry for attention, was going with them. They'd be gone from Friday evening to Sunday. That gave me a perfect window. I arranged the move for Saturday. I texted my father the night before their departure, saying I'd made a decision and would talk after the weekend. He warned me to be reasonable. For once, I didn't answer. Saturday morning dawned bright, and by 8 a.m. Sophie and the others were at my door with coffee, bagels, and a military-style pep talk. We dismantled the bed frame, boxed the kitchen, stacked books until the shelves stood bare. By noon, the apartment was hollowing out, each trip to the trucks pulling away more of the life I had carefully arranged. At lunch, sitting cross-legged on the floor with sandwiches, Sophie squeezed my hand. Sad, angry, relieved, proud, all of it, I confessed. She nodded. You're doing the right thing. By mid-afternoon, my new apartment filled with my belongings, arranged awkwardly but alive. My king bed nearly swallowed the bedroom. The sectional had to be divided into separate pieces to fit. Still, the space hummed with something precious ownership. At 3:30 p.m., the old place was nearly empty, stripped down to built-ins and curtains. I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter with the keys. 30 days rent, and a simple note: I am ending the lease in accordance with our agreement. I took only my property. I closed the door quietly, the click of the lock final, and walked away. That evening, my phone lit up like fireworks. Martha first frantic texts demanding to know where the furniture was, where she would sleep, how I could do this. Then my mother's shrill voicemails about betrayal, tears thick in her voice. My father's call came last, his tone colder, warning me I had violated the lease, threatening legal action. I waited until the pizza boxes were empty and my friends gone before I called him back. His anger hit like a wall. Explain yourself, he demanded. I told him the truth. I'd moved out, given notice, paid rent, and taken my own belongings. He insisted the furniture belonged in the unit. I reminded him of receipts, the absence of any clause in the lease, the law on my side. He faltered, then switched tactics. This wasn't about legality. It was about family. Martha had nowhere to sleep. I suggested an air mattress or their newly renovated guest room. The silence that followed told me what I'd long suspected: there had never been any renovations. My mother grabbed the phone next, sobbing about betrayal, demanding how I could do this to my sister. I said quietly that I had done nothing wrong. I had simply moved. The apartment had been unfurnished when I arrived. It was unfurnished again now. She fell silent, shocked at the clean logic. "I never thought you would actually leave," she whispered at last. There was something new in her tone, not approval, but perhaps the seed of respect. The next few days felt surreal, as if I had stepped out of a script that had bound me since childhood. My parents cycled between anger and disbelief, sending long messages about duty and sacrifice, about everything they had given me. My father's texts were stern but clipped, my mother's long and pleading. Martha's messages came in bursts, alternating between outrage and self-pity. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on making my new apartment into a home. The space was smaller, yes, but every corner belonged to me. No one moved my pillows without asking. No one emptied my groceries or borrowed my clothes. For the first time in years, silence meant peace, not tension. Unpacking revealed how much I had accumulated in those 5 years. The sofa looked too big, the bed nearly ridiculous in the tiny bedroom, but it didn't matter. These were the pieces I had chosen, purchased, and carried into my independence. I taped receipts to the inside of a folder, a quiet shield against any challenge, though none came. Sophie and her boyfriend helped me hang shelves, and when the last box was broken down, we sat on the floor eating takeout, laughing like conspirators who had pulled off an impossible heist. I felt lighter than I had in months. The real shift came in the weeks that followed. I introduced myself to neighbors, something I had never done before. Across the hall, a graphic designer invited me for coffee on the rooftop terrace, and we discovered we both liked early mornings. Next door, an older man offered to water my plants when I traveled. Slowly, a small community wrapped itself around me, not through obligation, but choice. At work, I found focus returning. The promotion talk resumed, my boss praising my campaign progress. And for the first time in weeks, I walked into meetings without the weight of home chaos pulling at me. Meanwhile, my family struggled to adjust to my absence. From my mother's updates relayed with a tone hovering between blame and disbelief, I learned that Martha had been forced to face reality. With no furniture left in the apartment, she began with an air mattress. After a week of poor sleep, she found a part-time job at a boutique, the first step toward buying her own bed. I couldn't help but notice the irony. Only when left without my support did she begin to stand on her own. My father, too, seemed less certain of his old authority. 2 weeks after my move, he called with a question that surprised me. "Are you managing with the budget?" His voice was softer, almost cautious. I told him the truth: things were tighter, but I was fine. In fact, the commute was cheaper, balancing the smaller paycheck margin. He hesitated, then admitted he and my mother had been talking about patterns we might have encouraged with Martha. It wasn't an apology, but it was more than I had ever expected. My mother remained resistant. She saw my leaving as betrayal, not boundary setting. Our conversations narrowed to safe topics: the weather, family birthdays, holiday logistics. But the absence of guilt, the lack of manipulation, made even those shallow exchanges a relief. I no longer feared her phone calls. They couldn't command my decisions anymore. The biggest surprise came from Martha herself. A month after I left, she texted to ask if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious but cautious. She arrived in simpler clothes, her makeup minimal, her posture less theatrical. For the first time, she looked more like a woman trying than a child demanding. Over steaming cups, she admitted she hadn't believed I would really leave. It was kind of badass, she said with a half smile. The look on Dad's face when we walked into that empty apartment, I wish I had taken a picture. I laughed despite myself. Then she grew serious. I've been thinking a lot about how I always expected people to take care of me, how I never had to face consequences. When you left, I suddenly had to figure things out. I hated that air mattress. So I got a job, and once I started working, I realized I liked having my own money. I listened, surprised by her honesty. She added that she was still at the apartment, but now paying rent, even if just a little. She was planning to find a roommate when the lease ended. Before we left, she hugged me awkwardly and whispered, "I'm sorry for being a terrible sister." I told her she wasn't terrible, just caught in unhealthy patterns. We both were. For the first time, I believed change might be possible between us. Months passed, and the distance transformed our family. At Thanksgiving, I joined them at my parents' house, unsure what to expect. The air was different, tense, yes, but not hostile. Martha brought dessert she had baked herself, proud to contribute. My father carved the turkey without his usual theatrics. My mother asked polite questions about my neighbors. We all sat at the same table, flawed but trying. I realized I no longer felt the same gnawing resentment or desperate need for their approval. Instead, I felt calm, accepting that we were imperfect people stumbling towards something better. The lesson that crystallized from those months wasn't about rent or furniture, but about boundaries. I had confused generosity with sacrifice, love with enabling. By drawing a firm line and refusing to bend under guilt, I had not only freed myself, but nudged my family toward growth. Independence, I learned, is not just financial, but emotional, the courage to choose your own path, even when others call it selfish. In that small apartment, I reclaimed not just my space, but my voice. A year later, the memory of that whirlwind moving day still felt sharp and vivid, like the scent of rain on concrete. I sat in my smaller apartment, now fully my own, surrounded by furniture that had once filled a larger space, but fit perfectly here. Over time, I had let go of pieces that didn't serve me and added new ones chosen specifically for this home. A narrow dining table that folded against the wall. A bright rug that made the living room feel expansive. Plants on the windowsill thriving in the afternoon sun. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. And the peace that filled it was worth more than square footage. At work, that stability spilled over. With fewer distractions, I poured energy into the Henderson account, the national fitness chain rebranding. When the campaign launched successfully, my supervisor called me into her office. She praised my resilience, noting how I had steadied myself after a rough patch. Then she offered the promotion she had hinted at months earlier, along with the raise I had dreamed of. I walked out of her office with my heart soaring, realizing how much had shifted in 1 year. By standing up for myself at home, I had reclaimed focus everywhere else. My friendships deepened, too. Sophie remained my closest ally, often reminding me of the day we had hauled boxes like soldiers. Independence Day, she still called it. My neighbors became more than acquaintances. Rooftop coffees turned into shared dinners. Quick chats in the hallway became friendships that lasted beyond the building. I had carved out a community chosen by mutual respect rather than obligation. And the difference was staggering. My family's evolution was slower, full of bumps and backslides. My mother still carried a quiet disappointment that I hadn't sacrificed more for Martha, but she no longer tried to guilt me into compliance. Conversations stayed shallow, but the manipulation had thinned, leaving room for politeness, if not closeness. My father softened gradually, our calls turning practical rather than confrontational. He asked about my projects, about whether my rent was manageable, and sometimes about Martha's progress with a tone that suggested self-reflection. For him, it was as close to an apology as I would ever get. Martha's transformation was the most surprising. Our coffee meeting had been the first crack in her shell, and over the months, she continued to grow. She moved out of my parents' building into a shared flat with a roommate she found through work. She texted me updates about small victories, buying her own bed, saving for a used car, resisting the urge to quit her job after a difficult week. They were ordinary milestones, but monumental for her. Our relationship thawed into something resembling balance. She no longer came to me expecting rescue. Instead, she came to talk, to laugh, to share. One evening, she sent me a picture of a new pair of shoes she had bought with her own paycheck. Writing, "First time I didn't ask anyone for money. Feels good." I replied with a simple, "I'm proud of you." And I meant it. Looking back, I realized the entire ordeal had been less about rent or furniture, and more about reclaiming respect both from my family and from myself. For years, I had played the role of the reliable one, the steady one, the one who bent whenever needed. I thought it was love, but really it was avoidance, a way of keeping peace by sacrificing my own. Leaving wasn't just about escaping Martha's chaos. It was about proving to myself that I could draw a line and hold it, even when the people closest to me pushed hardest against it. The most important lesson I carried was this: boundaries are not walls that shut people out, but doors that let healthier relationships in. By refusing to let my kindness be mistaken for weakness, I gave my sister a chance to grow, my parents a chance to reflect, and myself the chance to breathe. Independence wasn't measured by the size of my apartment or the digits in my bank account, but by the quiet certainty that my life was finally my own. As I sat by the window one rainy Sunday morning, coffee in hand, I thought of all the people who might find themselves trapped in similar patterns, always giving, rarely receiving, silenced by guilt. To them, I would say this: you have more strength than you think, and more choices than you fear. Change won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Sometimes the most loving act you can take for yourself, and even for those who depend on you, is to step out of the script and write your own. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you found something meaningful in my story, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment your own thoughts or experiences below. I'd love to hear from you.